The studio lights were merciless. They didn't just illuminate, they interrogated. Bright beams bounced off the glossy floor, off the chrome of the set, off the sheen of the host's suit. Cameras swiveled silently like hunting animals, red tally lights glowing whenever a new angle went live. The audience was packed shoulder to shoulder, faces shining under the heat, every laugh or gasp amplified by the acoustic panels that turned reaction into theater. At the center of it all sat Steven Seagal, larger than life, both in presence and in the way he filled the chair. He leaned back, arms draped wide, hair slicked to perfection, eyes half-lidded as though the whole evening was just another performance he'd already mastered. The host fed him questions, and Seagal fed back slow, confident answers, pausing just long enough for his words to sink in. The mood in the room was easy, even playful, until the host tilted his head and asked the question that had hovered in the background all night. "You've been called one of the toughest men in Hollywood," he said, smiling toward the camera. "But how do you compare yourself to, say, Chuck Norris?" A ripple went through the audience, the kind of ripple that comes before laughter or applause. The name alone carried weight. Decades of film, martial arts history, cultural myth. The energy shifted. Everyone leaned closer. Seagal's expression didn't falter. He leaned further into his chair, smile stretching, almost lazy. Then, with the timing of a man who knows exactly how to provoke, he said, "Chuck Norris? He's not a fighter. He's just an actor who plays tough." It was delivered casually, almost softly, but the effect was instant. A section of the crowd broke into laughter, some of it genuine, some of it nervous. The host's eyebrows flicked up, unsure whether to laugh along or steer away. In the back row, someone shouted, voice cutting through the laughter like a blade, "You don't disrespect a legend." The cameras caught it. A producer flinched in the control room, already knowing the clip would travel. Seagal didn't blink. He spread his hands as though he'd spoken a simple truth. "I've trained with real masters," he went on, nodding to his own words as if they were scripture. People believe in the movie version. But real fighting? That's something else. He let the silence sit, watching the host squirm, watching the audience split between laughter and unease. The show tried to recover, moving to another topic, but the moment hung in the air like smoke. When the credits rolled, people were already on their phones, thumbs stabbing screens. By the time Seagal left the studio, the internet had devoured the line, sliced it into clips, GIFs, memes. On Twitter, hashtags bloomed, #JustAnActor. Some used it as a joke, splicing the line over Norris's old commercials or action scenes. Others took it personally, posting grainy footage of Norris's early karate championships, his demonstrations with military units, training camps where young fighters hung on his every word. "Seagal just crossed a line," one post read, shared thousands of times. Another said, "You don't talk about Chuck that way." The debate raged. Comedy versus respect, Hollywood versus legacy. Sports radio picked it up. Talk shows replayed the moment. Late-night comics leaned into the absurdity, but in the comment sections beneath the jokes, the anger was real. Outside his Texas home, Chuck Norris was photographed running errands, carrying a bag of groceries, expression unreadable behind sunglasses. A local reporter tried to get a reaction. "Mr. Norris, any comment on Seagal's words?" Chuck simply kept walking, didn't break stride, didn't answer. That silence, clipped into 15-second segments, became its own storm. "If he won't answer, it means he doesn't care," Seagal's fans posted, emboldened. "He's not answering because words aren't needed," came the counter-argument, equally fierce. Within 48 hours, the silence felt louder than the insult. It pressed on the internet, on the media, on fans who wanted resolution. Everyone was waiting. The question wasn't whether Chuck Norris had heard. The question was What he would do with the insult, the whole world had now replayed 1,000,000 times. And that silence, more than Seagal's words, was the real beginning of the story. Just wondering, where are you watching from? Write it down, bellow. The clip didn't die down. It multiplied. It was on phones in barbershops, on muted screens over treadmills, embedded in articles no one finished because the comments moved faster than the paragraphs. By morning, radio hosts in Dallas were arguing about movie toughness versus real toughness, and by lunch, someone had cut Seagal's line over a montage of tournament footage from the 70s. The grain so rough, you could almost smell old gyms, sweat, tape glue, rubber mats warming under fluorescent lights. The internet split into camps and then into subcamps, each sure they were defending something larger than ego, respect, memory, the idea that grit can be verified and not just performed. Chuck didn't answer. He woke early, as always. Coffee, black. Yard still wet from the night sprinklers, the air with that mineral smell Texas mornings carry before heat flattens it. He checked the fence line, waved to a neighbor unloading feed, then drove to a small gym he liked because the lighting was ugly and the mirrors were honest. No posters, no soundtrack trying to persuade you of an identity. Just bags, a ring, a few lifters who minded their business. He taped his hands with the same method he'd taught 100 times, the roll whispering as it went around his wrist. Shadowboxed, while the custodian dragged a mop across last night's footprints. Worked the heavy bag, no theatrics, no grunting, finding the rhythm that lives under noise. Step, breathe, place, retract. A kid in his 20s watched from a corner, trying not to. He recognized the shape of the movement more than the face. On a break, Chuck nodded at him to come over, held pads, corrected an elbow angle with 2 fingers, and a wordless tap. The kid shone with the embarrassment of being seen and the relief of being taught. Outside, the noise grew legs. Seagal's fans posted clips of Aikido demonstrations, carefully edited and lacquered with captions. "He's hiding," they wrote. "If the shoe fits, wear it." Someone designed a t-shirt, "Just an actor?" across a still of Chuck mid-roundhouse from a movie that wasn't meant to convince anyone of anything, except that stories can move. Orders stacked up. The gag felt cheap even to those laughing. The other side answered with receipts, old metal tables, black and white photos from a state fairground tournament where folding chairs made up the front row, and a borrowed banner drooped behind the podium. Slower clips. Chuck working with trainees on a dusty bass, the kind of footage that vibrates your phone because someone's hand was shaking, then steadies when their eyes forget to blink. Hashtags appeared like prairie grass. Hashtag respect is a workout. Hashtag just an actor with the caption flipped. Over a still of a worn GI, a young face squinting into a sun decades gone. The thread wasn't anger, it was testimony. In the middle of it, Chuck lifted, stretched, jogged the perimeter of the parking lot, while heat began to push up off the asphalt. A woman walking her dog recognized him and didn't bother with her phone. "Mornin', mister." "Norris," she said, polite as weather. He tipped 2 fingers from the tape roll and kept moving. When a local cameraman tried to get a comment through the chain link, Chuck met his eyes and shook his head once. Not disdain, boundary. The silence pressed. Producers called, late night, morning shows, a streaming doc that wanted to turn the moment into a mini-series of umbrage. Publicists drafted statements that used words like legacy, gratitude, brotherhood. He deleted them. There is a kind of noise that asks you to join it, just so it can devour your outline. By day 3, even friends texted, "Say something." He didn't. He trained, ate, stretched, slept. In the garage that smelled of oil and cedar, he cleaned an old pair of gloves, rubbing conditioner into cracked leather with the attention you give to a tool that once saved you time. On the workbench sat a stack of VHS tapes someone had digitized for him years back. He slid one into a dusty player and watched a younger version of himself lose a round and win the night by learning where he'd been lazy. He didn't smile. He filed the lesson back in the drawer where he keeps useful pain. Online, the crowd metastasized into a third character: restless, judgy, generous, bored, furious. A woman in Ohio posted a thread about how her dad made her watch old tournament footage on Sundays because discipline is a language and you'll need to be fluent. A man in Phoenix confessed he'd laughed at the meme and then remembered the day a quiet instructor taught him how to breathe through a panic attack. A veteran typed 3 words and logged off. Respect buys quiet. Where's your boy now? A Seagal fan account jeered under a shot of Chuck loading groceries into his trunk. Replies stacked. He's busy doing, you're busy narrating. The fight wasn't a fight. It was a referendum on what counts. The gym door chimed. A freelance reporter with a mic so new the sticker was still on, it approached the desk and asked the owner if Chuck might spare a sentence. The owner looked at the clock, then at the ring. He's busy, he said, and meant it. Chuck finished a round, breathed deep, wiped his face with a threadbare towel, then stepped down. He saw the reporter and didn't sigh, which was mercy. He nodded toward a quieter corner of the gym, the one where a vending machine hummed and a fan turned the air with a soft belt squeal. The camera focused. He didn't check his hair or square up to find his light. He glanced once at the lens, as if making sure the person on the other side was real. Mr. Norris, do you have a response to what Steven Seagal said? He let the question sit. The gym made its small noises, bag chains creaking, a glove thumping rhythm, coins falling deep in the machine. He glanced at the ring, then back. Words don't cost much, he said finally. No heat on it, no poetry. If he'd like to find out, he can meet me in a ring. He didn't specify rules or cameras. He didn't add a smirk. That's all. The reporter waited for more. There wasn't any. Chuck shook his hand, then returned to the ring and reset the round timer with a click that sounded louder, because everyone had stopped moving to listen. The pad holder smiled without showing teeth. Back to it? He asked. Chuck nodded. By the time the reporter reached his car, the clip had been posted, captioned, ripped, subtitled in 3 languages, argued over. Headlines learned the line by heart and put it in quotation marks like a verdict. Words don't cost much. Meet me in a ring. Talk radio stopped laughing. A Vegas promoter sent 2 emails in an hour. An arena penciled a date nobody would admit they were already cleaning for. And the crowd, the third character, felt the air change the way animals sense weather. Something had moved from rumor to plan. The noise didn't vanquish the silence, it became the drumbeat under it. The question wasn't whether a ring would be booked. It was whether, when the lights burned hot and every camera finally had its feast, either man would still like what the truth tasted like. Las Vegas had been waiting for this night the way deserts wait for storms. Billboards along the Strip shouted about it for weeks. 2 names side by side. No need for subtitles. Hotels filled with fans who wanted to say they were there, who wanted a ticket stub to prove it. Cab drivers, bartenders, dealers at blackjack tables. They all spoke of it in the same way, with half disbelief and half certainty. It was going to happen. Inside the arena, everything hummed. The air conditioning struggled against bodies and nerves, and the place smelled of cologne, fried concessions, beer spilled on concrete. Above, the lights hung like a mechanical galaxy. Hot white circles focused on the ring at the center. Every seat was occupied, every aisle blocked by people craning for a view. Phones hovered everywhere, small, glowing rectangles aimed at history before it had even happened. The buzz was alive, jittery, restless. Some laughed too loud, others whispered bets in low tones. The ring announcer's voice boomed now and then, reminding the crowd to wait, to hold their breath a little longer. The mat gleamed faintly under the overheads, already damp with anticipation. Backstage, Steven Seagal stood behind the curtain, massive frame barely fitting into the shadows. His jacket was sleek, his posture calculated. He breathed slowly, deliberately, projecting calm. He knew how to own a stage, how to turn an entrance into theater. When the music hit, a heavy beat with swagger written into every note, he moved. The curtain parted. He stepped forward with the slowness of a man who wanted the crowd to drink him in. Arms wide, shoulders back, lips curled into that practiced half-smile. His fans exploded. They screamed his name, waved posters. Real power, no stunts. The master returns. Seagal soaked it up, pausing midway down the ramp, lifting his arms as if the energy belonged to him. Cameras zoomed close until his face filled the giant screens overhead. He entered the ring like it was already his stage, pulling the ropes aside, stepping through with ceremonial weight. Then the lights cut. The music choked mid-beat. For a second, the arena dropped into darkness, broken only by exit signs and the restless glow of thousands of phones. A hush spread. People looked toward the tunnel. No music started. No pyro. No smoke. Just a figure walking forward. Chuck Norris. He wore no elaborate robe, no colors designed to pop against the lights. Jeans. A plain jacket. The only sound was his boots against the ramp. Steady. Measured. He didn't wave, didn't smile. He looked at the ring, then at the faces near the barricade, acknowledging them with a tilt of his head. That was enough. The crowd erupted. It wasn't a roar of spectacle. It was something deeper. People stood without thinking. A woman in the front row clutched her chest as tears filled her eyes. A group of firefighters in one section raised their beers, then set them down wordlessly, unwilling to look away. The noise was pure release, the kind of sound that comes when silence has pressed too long and finally bursts. Chuck climbed the steps, wiped his boots on the edge of the apron, ducked under the rope. He touched the corner post lightly, almost reverently, before settling into his corner. No bounce, no show, just presence. The referee called them to the center. The canvas gave that soft, hollow thud with each step. Seagal moved slowly, head high, smirk intact. Chuck's eyes were unreadable, steady as stone. The ref recited the rules, formality nobody believed would matter. Seagal leaned forward, close enough that the cameras couldn't catch the words. "No cameras here, old man," he whispered, voice slick with arrogance. "No retakes." His breath carried bravado, cinnamon gum masking nerves. Chuck answered without blinking. His voice was low, colder than the lights above. "That's why you've already lost." Something shifted. Even in the upper tiers, people felt it. The noise faltered, dropped a notch, as if the sentence itself had weight that bent the air. They returned to their corners. The ring announcers stretched their names like a song, voices booming, echoing off steel and glass. In the cheap seats, phones tilted higher. In the broadcast truck, a producer barked to hold the wide shot. The faces in the crowd were telling the story better than any close-up. The timekeeper raised the mallet. Hands gripped armrests. Sweat slicked palms. In living rooms across the country, people leaned closer to screens. Texts half-written, "It's about to start." Between introductions and the first bell, there is always a crack in time, a seam where bravado slips, and only truth remains. The arena slid into that seam. Seagal paced, lips pursed, chin lifted. Chuck stood still, head tilted slightly, as though listening for something beyond the noise. The mallet came down, and in that suspended instant, everyone in the building understood the same thing. This wasn't entertainment. It wasn't spectacle. It was judgment. On words, on pride, on what strength really meant. The quiet didn't fade. It pressed down harder, turning into a kind of sound of its own. The jukebox stopped mid-song. The bartender's rag froze on the same glass. Even the neon clock above the door seemed to hum more loudly. People shifted in their seats, not to leave, but to brace. The air in the bar had thickened, like everyone was waiting for the next strike of thunder. The tall biker, the one who had claimed the floor all night, decided silence wasn't his friend. He grinned wide, showing teeth, and stepped forward into the circle of light that pooled around the veteran's table. "Look at this," he said, raising his voice so the whole room had to take it. "Old actor strolls in here thinking he can preach morals to us?" He let the word drip with scorn, dragged it out as if he could squeeze laughter from the walls. A couple of his men barked on cue, but their voices didn't catch the way they had earlier. It sounded forced, thin. The crowd didn't return the echo. The man in denim didn't answer. He pulled out a chair slowly, the legs scraping wood with a whisper that carried more weight than shouting. He sat beside the veteran, like that's where he'd always been meant to sit, close enough that the trembling in the old man's shoulders eased. His hands rested on the table, steady. He never once looked away from the bikers. The silence grew sharper. A woman at the bar exhaled through her nose and said softly, "Enough." It wasn't meant for the room, but the room took it. A man near the jukebox added, "Yeah, that's enough," his voice firmer, like he'd surprised himself by speaking. Another cleared his throat, loud enough to register as support. It wasn't a chorus yet, but it was a current. Phones appeared like fireflies, small red recording dots, glowing screens raised higher. A freckled biker noticed and grinned, holding his phone high. "History in the making," he crowed, turning his lens toward the veteran, toward the medal, then toward the stranger's unflinching stare. "Come on, give us a show." The leader smirked wider. He pointed at the phones, then back at the man in denim. "Your fans want a speech, preacher. What's it gonna be? Another bedtime story about respect?" His voice cracked just slightly, but he masked it with a laugh. The man in denim stayed silent. He moved a coaster so the veteran's glass wouldn't slide in the puddle of spilled beer. A small gesture, plain, yet it sliced through the noise sharper than words. The veteran looked at him for a second, his lips tight, then dropped his eyes back to the table. That gesture rattled the leader more than defiance would have. His laugh faltered. He planted both hands on the table and leaned in, his shadow falling over the metal like a threat. "You got a name?" he asked, though he didn't care about the answer. "Doesn't matter. You're quiet." And quiet gets stepped on. The man in denim didn't flinch. His stillness told the crowd more than any name could. The bar had divided itself. Some leaned forward, phones up, desperate to capture the breaking point. Others sat rigid, ashamed they'd been silent so long, but unable to move now. A man in a cowboy hat clenched his jaw and set his beer down too hard, froth spilling, but he stayed seated. Every movement was a question. Who would act first? The leader sniffed at the silence, mistaking it for an invitation. He sneered at the veteran. This one was learning a lesson. "You think you're here to stop it? You sit at his side, you get taught too." He straightened and swept a look across the room, searching for approval, but the eyes looking back weren't laughing. Some were flat, some curious, some angry. The crowd had shifted, even if he hadn't noticed. The freckled biker tried to spark the moment back to life. He waved his phone like a torch. "Come on, let's see what strong and silent means. Show us!" His voice shook just a hair. He laughed at himself to cover it, but the sound bounced hollow. The leader needed punctuation. He looked down and saw the heavy mug the bartender had left, beads of condensation sliding down its side. The table's surface glistened in the low light. "Here's your respect," he spat. His arms swung fast and flat, forearms smashing the mug off the table's edge. For a half-second, it spun in the air, catching the light in amber flashes before shattering against the floor. The explosion of glass and beer ripped through the quiet. Foam sprayed up the man in denim's jeans, splattered the veteran's jacket, hissed across the boards in every direction. Shards bounced and skittered like teeth being thrown. The room didn't gasp, it froze. The only sound was the foam fizzing, crawling out in white streaks around boots. Every person in the bar had the same thought at the same second. That was the line. No one moved. No one breathed. Every eye turned to the man in denim, waiting for what would happen next. Breathing filled the bar like static. Short, rough, uneven. The foam from the shattered mug crawled out in thin streaks across the floor, fizzing until it went flat. A shard spun under a stool and stopped with a tiny glassy ping. Nobody laughed. Nobody shifted. The silence was heavier than the noise that came before it. The leader adjusted his stance, trying to reassemble authority. He smirked, too wide, too brittle. Then he stepped forward, arm extending, hand open, as if to land on the denim shoulder. It wasn't a punch. It was worse. A grip meant to humiliate, to show everyone that the room still belonged to him. The hand never landed. The stranger's arm moved with quiet efficiency. His thumb slid into the soft web between the biker's thumb and forefinger, and a gentle twist turned posture into collapse. The leader's elbow bent, his shoulder folded, his spine bowed. His boots slid on spilled beer until his palm hit the table with a smack. His cheek hovered just above the metal. A grunt tore from his throat, more shock than pain. The man in denim pinned his fingers together with clinical precision, nothing wasted. It wasn't violent, it was absolute. The bar exhaled as one. A chair creaked. Someone whispered, "Jesus!" Two bikers lunged a half-step forward, fists tightening. But when the stranger finally stood to his full height, they froze. He didn't glare. He simply looked. That stillness was enough. Their courage leaked out of their shoulders. From the window booth came a single clap. Another joined. Then silence again, as if the room was testing its own voice. The bartender finally spoke, towel still in his fist. "Easy," he said, words cracking. It wasn't a command. It was a plea. The freckled biker kept his phone raised, the red recording dot trembling. "Reese, you good?" he asked, voice too thin. The pinned man tried to move, learned instantly that leverage doesn't argue. His jaw clenched. The veteran sat frozen, but the tremor in his hands had eased. His eyes tracked the small, efficient motions, the thumb placement, the exact pressure. He recognized competence. It was a kind of protection he hadn't expected to see again. "Don't," the denim man said quietly. Just one word. It stopped the two who'd thought of rushing in. It settled into the air like iron. The leader tried to reclaim sound. "Let me go," he hissed, teeth gritted. His voice cracked on the last syllable. "Not yet." The hold didn't tighten, but it didn't give. It simply reminded him that all his strength had nowhere to go. A woman at the bar said, louder this time, "That's enough." Heads turned. A ranch hand echoed, "Yeah." The room, which had been passive, began to align. Another biker shifted, shoulders rolling like he might act. He stopped himself halfway, pretending he'd only moved to adjust his stance. Nobody believed it. The bearded one stared at the floorboards as though they might offer a script. The freckled kid tried for bravado. "Strong and silent, huh?" His laugh cracked in the middle. The phone sagged an inch. He didn't bring it back up. The veteran stared at the metal, trapped beneath the leader's palm. Beer soaked the ribbon, but the metal still gleamed faintly. He let out a slow breath. His lips tightened, not from fear but something closer to relief. The leader spat words like they might buy him back. "You think you're better than us?" His face had gone blotchy, sweat gathering at his hairline. The man in denim didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence was reply enough. "Back off!" one biker barked, but the room didn't flinch. A few people actually nodded at the stranger instead. The crowd was shifting in plain sight, and the bikers could feel it. The union man at the window booth raised his voice. "Listen to him!" His words carried farther this time. Another patron thumped the table with two knuckles in agreement. Small noises, but they mattered. The denim man's voice finally returned. Steady, low, clear. He gave years of his life to this country. His eyes never left the pinned man. He tipped his head toward the veteran. And you're spending yours on cheap performances. The words sank into the wood, into the glasses, into the people who'd sat too long in silence. A few clapped again, hesitant at first, then stronger. Not celebration, alignment. The leader felt the verdict in his bones. His crew avoided his eyes. The veteran straightened, shoulders a little higher. The bartender laid his towel flat on the counter like he was done pretending to clean. And for a long moment, no one dared to move. The leader tried to stitch himself back together with noise. His jaw set, breath jerking, eyes darting to the little red lights of recording phones as if they might rescue him. "You don't know who you're messing with," he said, aiming the words at the stranger, then the crowd. They cracked halfway up his throat. Everyone in the room heard the break. The man in denim didn't gloat. He simply held the wrist he'd captured, eyes calm. "I know," he said, voice even, no rush. "You're a man who thinks strength is humiliating, whoever looks weaker." It wasn't shouted, but the words spread like dropped stones. The crew shifted, suddenly smaller in their vests. The freckled kid's phone sagged toward the floor, the red recording dot trembling in his hand. Nobody cheered. Nobody laughed. Then the hold ended. No shove, no show. The stranger just let go. The leader's legs betrayed him, and he collapsed into a chair with an awkward scrape. He sat there, shoulders hunched, looking less like a fighter and more like a man who had lost the thread of himself. The veteran's eyes stayed fixed on the table. His hand hovered over the metal until the stranger picked it up, wiped the wet glass away with his thumb, and set it carefully in front of him. "This is the weight that counts," the stranger said, steady, plain. "Respect? The rest, you'll figure out." The veteran pressed his palm over the metal. His shoulders shifted, just enough to show that the tremor in him had quieted. "Thank you," he said, voice cracked but whole. The bartender placed a fresh glass of water on the table. "On the house," he said simply. It was the closest thing to an apology he could give. The woman at the bar, who had first whispered enough, nodded, relief loosening her face. Clapping started in the back, uncertain, then joined by another, then a third. It grew, not into raucous cheering, but into steady applause. Not triumph, not entertainment. Agreement. Phones recorded, but not with the same hunger. The lenses weren't catching humiliation anymore. They were keeping record. The leader tried again. "We were just—" He couldn't finish. His crew avoided his eyes, patches on their backs suddenly looking flimsy. One tugged at his vest. Another nudged glass aside with his boot, focusing on the sound it made so he wouldn't have to look at anyone. The stranger turned to the veteran. "You good?" The old man nodded once, medal back on his chest, clasp pinned with care. He pressed his palm against it, a gesture only for himself. Engines rumbled outside as the bikers drifted toward the door, not retreating but not owning the floor anymore either. When the door shut behind them, the room didn't roar. It breathed. People straightened. The union man at the window booth tapped his knuckles against wood like punctuation. A couple at a corner table laced fingers. The bartender finally put down his rag. The neon clock hummed like it had all along. The man in denim rose. He wiped beer from his jeans with a flat hand, angled toward the exit. At the door he paused. Not for show, not for the cameras, but to look once more at the veteran. The old man raised his glass of water slightly, the smallest salute. The denim man returned a nod and stepped into the night. Silence lingered after the door closed. The jukebox flickered awake, then stilled again. The bar held the quiet like a bowl holds water, careful not to spill it. By morning, the videos would spread, grainy clips from 3 angles, captions arguing over what mattered most. Silence wins. Respect is heavier. He didn't throw a punch. Talk shows would chew it, radio callers would argue it, but none of that belonged to the bar. Here, the story ended with broken glass swept into a pan, with bills tucked under salt shakers, with a medal shining dully on an old man's chest. That night, the bikers learned a truth patches can't cover. There are people before whom shouting weighs nothing, because Chuck's quiet and the plain force of respect outweighed any blow they could have thrown.